I'm Jonathan Tan. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Coreshell Technologies. I used to be a chemical engineer, or I was trained as a chemical engineer, moved into business development. I think what really drives me, I've really always tried to be an advocate for sustainability and equity. And that was one of the major reasons why we started Coreshell, is that we felt like there was a real urgency to apply our skills to do something to combat global climate change and really use technology to further that fight. I was born in China, but I moved to the United States when I was a little over 2 years old. I guess we were an immigrant family. Both my parents grew up in rural China, which back at that time was pretty impoverished. So they grew up with very little. And I think their story is a lot more remarkable than mine in terms of my dad getting his PhD and moving the family over to the United States. So I think that immigrant story and the way that my parents raised me really made me have a sense of duty to working hard and being stubborn and being very persistent. I think the other part of it about the way that I grew up is that so my family's from China, but I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in the middle of Missouri. So I think that I kind of grew up with this mixture of coming from an immigrant family, but being in the Midwest at that time, I think there was, and I hope there still is, a kind of bravado to the Americana of the Midwest that I think is also still hopefully very important and part of my entrepreneur's journey, which is that, there's the persistence and the hardworking attitude that my parents embedded with me, but there's also kind of a sense of risk taking and a sense of betting big on yourself and betting big on the things that you believe in, that I hope is still part of the, for lack of a better term, the American fabric, the American dream. Especially when I think about the kind of climate that we're living in today, I think both things are pretty important to still hold on to, allowing people from different parts of the world to come here and find a better life for their families, but then also allowing the people that are here to really still bet big on themselves, still really bet big on the things that they fundamentally believe in for the greater good of society, and create things that are meaningful around that. My co-founder and I, we've actually known each other since our first day of freshman college at UC Berkeley. I got really lucky, right? We've known each other. We've been best friends for 18 years. And not only that, not that I would recommend everyone who's trying to start a company to start something with their best friend. We just also happen to have, I think, very complementary skill sets and purviews, in that we had enough differentiation. He's very technical, so he's the CTO. He focuses on the technology and really making a world-class product and developing some fundamentally groundbreaking materials. I'm a chemical engineer, as I mentioned, but I've focused a lot of my career on more of the business development side of things. So there, it's kind of nice to have a little bit of a balance between those two, but enough overlap so that we have a way to kind of come together and speak about things and both understand. So that, I think, was just really lucky for us. We just got kind of very fortunate, and to have kind of that really deep relationship already heading into Coreshell has just made it easier to have trust and to be able to communicate and be able to work through challenges together. That would be my one advice for anyone who is searching for a co-founder or trying to find a co-founder, is that at the end of the day, it's a really fundamentally deep relationship that you're going to be building. It's a really long journey that you're going to be building. So you have to be able to already have or build really strong foundations of trust within each other, and to find where you guys each can highlight your own abilities and find areas within the company to do that, because you're not always going to be able to do everything all at once together, and then you're also not going to be able to do things together. Sometimes you'll have to separate and do things independently, and more so as you kind of grow. So that's kind of my suggestion. I think it was there's definitely an organic learning experience in a lot of different ways. Even though we've been, as I mentioned, best friends for 18 years, it's starting a company is a different relationship. It's not the same as being friends. As I mentioned, it's not like I would necessarily recommend everyone go start a company with their best friend. There is, just a need for a lot of communication at a different level. There's a kind of a learning of each other's working styles and the ways that you like to work, because you don't necessarily work with your best friend, right? You also have to figure out a way to find a kind of unified vision of things. And I think having a startup can be just a very deeply personal experience. And to have the ability to share that with somebody else means that you also have to be on kind of the same page on where you see the company heading. What do you see in terms of the vision, a year out, 2 years out, 5 years out, 10 years out. And you have to be aligned on that. And so I think that's something that you just have to learn as you go. The good thing about having someone that you're really close with is that you can have conflict and realize that doesn't affect necessarily your fundamental relationship. And that conflict, I think, is actually necessary. And I feel fortunate that both, I think, Roger and I understood that there needs to be points of conflict or points of tension, I would say, in order for the company to actually progress. Because we're not going to be exactly on the same page, and having those kind of moments is actually good sometimes for the growth of the company. I think culture is something that personally I feel very strongly about. I want to bring in people not only have the skills to do the things that we need them to do, but also make the company a good place where people like to work, where people can feel like they personally thrive. Because I really feel like that's actually going to be critical to us winning, or critical to us actually developing. So for me, I always look for people that I feel like have a really strong sense of decency and integrity within the way that they go about their lives, in addition to being very intelligent, both from a thought process, but also having emotional intelligence as well. Whenever I talk to them, having kind of a good amount of self-realization. We also don't want to have too much of the same types of person in the room. We like trying to find diversity. We like trying to find people with different points of view. As I mentioned, you need kind of a lot of different voices. You need to have sometimes points of tension in order for the company to grow. I'm still trying to learn as much as I can, still learning as much as I can about the role itself. Recently, I've been thinking a lot about the transition from being a founder to a CEO. Those two things can be fundamentally different. As a founder, the company is your baby, right? Like you come in, and both of you, this is like kind of when you become, I think, move into more of the CEO or executive role, you're kind of handing that off to people, and you're kind of stepping back and allowing them to create the company. And in a sense, that's kind of what I want, is that as moving forward, I don't want this to be just my baby or Roger's baby. I want this to be, I want the company to actually be of and for the employees. I want them to take ownership of it. And as a CEO, I'm trying to think more about my role in stepping back and allowing them the space to do that, but then giving them enough direction in order to guide them towards the vision that we kind of share together. I've always been drawn to the belief that people should not be afraid to do things that are uncomfortable or discomforting, and that a lot of people have maybe a little too much fear or a little bit too much aversion to being in discomfort, whether that's physically, socially, emotionally. And I think those are the types of things that you really need to actually seek out, because that's how you grow and how you learn about yourself as a person. And if you don't, you're really kind of limiting the type of person that you're going to become. You're going to limit the experiences that you have. When I think about that in relation to Coreshell, I think something that I think we always have tried to instill within Coreshell, and we like to be driven by data-based decisions as much as what we can. And the reason why I think that kind of comes back to this sense of discomfort is that we always look for answers outside of the company as much as possible, at least thus far, because we feel like this challenge that we've taken on is incredibly difficult. And I think a lot of people have a bit of I don't know if it's a misnotion, but a bit of a notion that you kind of huddle together in a garage and somehow you come out with this amazing product that is revolutionary, right? The kind of like huddled entrepreneur in the garage. I think that comes with a lot of problems. You can get lucky, but a better way to do it is just to go out to the market and see and ask people, right? And that can be really uncomfortable to take something that, as I mentioned, is so deeply personal, that you go out and you ask people, is this something that is fundamentally game changing? Do you think that this is going to work? So that's something that we try to do with every aspect of our company, is to go out and test our assumptions, right? To go out and validate, are the assumptions that we're making the right ones that are going to lead us to kind of what we hope to be a revolutionary product someday. So we're creating a component that goes into batteries. So someday we hope to be the sort of the Intel inside of battery technology. So we're creating a coating product that goes into the batteries, that then goes into the automotives and the kind of grid storage units. Our coating product is a nano-layer coating that goes inside the battery. We hope to be that kind of component that powers the electric vehicle or powers the grid storage by providing a much higher performance level, a much greater safety level, and a much longer life than would be previously accessible without our product in it. And so when you have something with the Coreshell product, our hope is that our brand would mean that is a sign of quality and reliability in your batteries, which I think is going to be vitally more important as we go forward into putting these batteries into really big units that are kind of ever present in a lot of our lives. And honestly, there's almost too much advice to kind of distill into things. One of the ones that I guess I'll just mention, I think it was Mark Tarpenning, who's the co-founder of Tesla, came and kind of talked to our class or cohort at Skydeck, and he mentioned that oftentimes as an executive or CEOs, founders, there's too many fires burning all at once for you to have to be able to put out everything. As your role as a founder and entrepreneur is to really realize which ones you can kind of keep burning in the background and which ones you really have to put out now. As a founder, you have to be able to be mindful of what are the things that you really need to be tackling at the moment, because there's going to be way too many things to do all at once every single day. And if you try to do all of that, it's not going to be productive towards furthering the company towards its goals. I feel like there's almost maybe a little bit of a misconception about this concept of passion for starting a company, and that's not to say that I don't believe that passion is critically important in a lot of people's personal journeys, but I think it's what I would say is to go even further and think about really fundamentally what motivates you. Think about that why of why you're doing what you're doing, and really be grounded in that, and try to come back to that as much as possible. And that could be a passion, but it could be a number of other things, right? It could be, and usually it's something that I think is really deeply unique and personal to yourself, as to why you decided to start this journey and why you continue on in this journey. There's going to be a lot of challenging times, right? There's going to be a lot of challenging times. There's going to be a lot of great times as well. But in those really challenging times, in those times where you have conflicts with your co-founders, where there's a lot where things don't feel like there's going to be something that works out, there has to be something that internally still drives you to keep moving forward. Really understanding that and understanding the why is just really great for not only progressing your company, but then hopefully also being able to provide yourself with the joy that continues to motivate you moving forward. And kind of touching upon that, the other part that I would say is that really understanding that why, and then realizing that as entrepreneurs, we are incredibly privileged to have this opportunity to do this, right? So that it's not just something that you should take that privilege for granted, and you should have some gratitude for that. Is that we get to do this, right? We get to chase after our dreams in a fundamental way, and that's not something that's afforded to everyone. And so it's really having that gratitude and then understanding that why is a better way, I think, in my mind, to think about things rather than just thinking that you have to have passion every single day, because there are days where you're not going to feel the passion necessarily, but you still have to have that fundamental motivation driving you. We definitely, I think both my co-founder and I spend a lot of time thinking about and working on the company. So I feel like in choosing that, I had to give up a lot of my recreation. What I made a pretty active decision not to do was to give up on my really close relationships, particularly with my fiance. Really still try to be present in our relationship as much as possible, and not take kind of that for granted. This entrepreneur's journey can be so all-encompassing that you also don't want to lose a lot of your personal relationships, a lot of things that you had before starting this journey, and kind of hold on to those as much as possible. Often as entrepreneurs and as founders, we get asked a lot of questions about our company and our startup, and we spend a lot of time talking about our startup and our companies. Thinking about kind of the personal entrepreneur's journey is also important for the founders to really think about, because it kind of fuels the direction of the company. As founders, we just have a lot of influence and of course the kind of the culture that we set and the way that we run the companies really affects how our employees act and how the company continues to grow.